Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story: a Wells Fargo bank employee in China now barred from leaving the country. Is doing business there too risky for foreign executives? The Department of Agriculture is sacking 70 foreign contract researchers, a move aimed at protecting the U.S. food supply from threats linked to China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. Concerns are growing over the Chinese regime's role in U.S. military computer systems, with a top U.S. lawmaker sounding the alarm about Chinese engineers working for Microsoft behind the scenes. The U.S. is teaming up with Panama to defend the Panama Canal as China pushes for more control. With port ownership stalled and tensions rising, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth warns Beijing's influence is growing. And drones have become a key weapon in the Ukraine war. The U.S. is working to produce more American-made drones, aiming to cut dependence on China. A Wells Fargo employee in China banned from leaving the country. This move is renewing fears among foreign businesses about the risks of operating in China. Let's zoom in.
Mixed signals coming from the world's second largest economy about doing business there. China has been trying to attract foreign companies by promoting itself as business friendly. But at the same time, news has surfaced that a Wells Fargo bank employee has been banned from leaving the country. Wall Street Journal reports that the exit ban applies to Shanghai-born Chen Yuemao, who heads the bank's international factoring business. Business groups, diplomats, and overseas executives say the incident is part of a long-term trend that had appeared to ease. A spokesperson for China's foreign ministry said he was not aware of the matter. He added that China is committed to providing a welcoming environment for foreign companies. The U.S. Embassy in Beijing said it could not comment on specifics, but said it raised concerns with Chinese authorities about arbitrary exit bans on American citizens.
According to a Reuters report, Mao is a U.S. citizen. The Duihua Foundation is a nonprofit working to free political prisoners in China. It estimates more than 200 Americans are wrongfully detained or face coercive measures there. These include exit bans. In November last year, the U.S. State Department updated its travel advisory for mainland China. It warned visitors to exercise increased caution, saying this is due to arbitrary enforcement of local laws, including in relation to exit bans. A 2022 academic study found 29 Americans and 44 Canadians faced exit bans between 1995 and 2019. Around a third of those bans were business-related. The Department of Agriculture says it has fired 70 foreign contract researchers. The move follows a national security review aimed at protecting the U.S. food supply from adversaries including China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. Here's more.
Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins announced a farm security plan on July 8th. The plan includes efforts to bar purchases of U.S. farmland by foreign nationals from the 4 countries. Any existing research agreements with them would be terminated. Rollins said the moves were necessary to secure the U.S. supply. A government union official said most of those dismissed were Chinese postdoctoral researchers on 2-year contracts with the agency.
Last month, 3 Chinese researchers were arrested in the U.S. 2 were accused of bringing dangerous crop-killing fungus samples into the country. One of them was a lab researcher at the University of Michigan while receiving funding from the Chinese regime. A 3rd Chinese researcher is now facing federal charges for allegedly trying to smuggle biological materials into the U.S. U.S. Senator Tom Cotton is pressing the Pentagon after reports revealed Chinese engineers are helping maintain the Defense Department's computer systems. Cotton raised the alarm in a letter to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, citing a recent ProPublica investigation. The report says Microsoft hired subcontractors in China to manage critical U.S. military cloud computing systems. Microsoft has been in the U.S. government's cloud business for over a decade, winning contracts by promising to use cleared U.S. citizens to oversee foreign-based staff. But ProPublica says those so-called digital escorts often lack the technical skills to detect potential threats. Microsoft declined to comment to Reuters, but told ProPublica it had disclosed its practices to the government. Microsoft is one of the U.S. government's top tech contractors and has already suffered cyber attacks from both Chinese and Russian hackers. In his letter, Senator Cotton called on the military to list all contractors using Chinese personnel. He also asked how employers are trained to run background checks during the hiring process. Cotton warned China's cyber capabilities pose a serious threat to national security. He pointed to past attacks on critical U.S. infrastructure and telecom networks. Cotton said the U.S. military must stay vigilant, especially when Chinese subcontractors are involved in the supply chain. The head of a U.S. congressional committee is warning Panama over growing Chinese influence on the Panama Canal. This comes after reports that Chinese state-owned firms are bidding for port operations, currently being sold by Hong Kong-based CK Hutchison Holdings. John Molinar, chairman of the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, raised concerns about China's expanding role in the region. The Panama Canal is a key hub for global shipping and supply chains. In a letter to Panama's maritime minister, Molinar warned that whoever takes control of the Panama Canal ports, Cristobal and Balboa, must not have ties to the CCP. He specifically called out the Chinese state-owned company COSCO Shipping as a particular concern. The two ports are currently operated by Hong Kong-based CK Hutchison. The company is trying to sell its global port assets to U.S. investment giant BlackRock in a $23 billion deal. But the deal is now on hold. Panama's Supreme Court is reviewing a constitutional challenge that could overturn a 1997 agreement. That decades-old concession gave CK Hutchison exclusive development rights near key canal zones, along with veto power over new infrastructure projects. China has strongly opposed the BlackRock deal. It launched an antitrust probe and slammed the move in state media as a betrayal of national interests. Analysts say the standoff goes beyond ports. It reflects the broader U.S.-China competition over critical infrastructure in the Americas. In America's backyard, the U.S. is training with Panama this week to defend the Panama Canal amid concerns over China's expanding presence in the region. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has warned about China's growing military and economic influence over the canal.
They're building a tunnel underneath the canal they're paying for. What could that be used for? Surveillance of submarines, of ships, bridges over the top, cranes within. We flew by their cranes in that port, antennas all over them. What are those used to do? We didn't see, by now, they're removing a lot of that signage, but removing signage is not enough. You've got to remove the insidious influence.
The military drills this week are designed to prepare for security threats to the waterway and other strategic infrastructure. The critical waterway connects the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans to facilitate global trade. More than 40% of U.S. container traffic travels through the key waterway. China is the canal's second largest customer after the U.S. Hong Kong company CK Hutchison operates two ports of the Panama Canal. President Trump has repeatedly said he wants the canal back under American control. CK Hutchison agreed to sell its controlling stake to the U.S. investment firm BlackRock. But China is now reportedly threatening to block the sale unless its state-owned shipping giant COSCO gets a stake. 18 American-made drone prototypes are on display this week at the Pentagon. The U.S. Defense Department is working with the industry to produce more American-made drones, as these unmanned flying systems prove crucial in the war in Ukraine. To discuss, NTD's Steve Lance was joined by Brett Feddersen, Vice President of Strategy Government Affairs at Defend Solutions.
And China produces roughly 80% of all commercial drones sold in America. How big of a national security concern is this? And how is critical infrastructure perhaps vulnerable to some of these drones?
And that's a great question. And a lot of people, I don't think, want to deal with the reality that we have, because we do depend on China for quite a bit of things here in the U.S. commercial market. But the truth is they are an adversary of sorts. They are in competition with us. They are constantly working to find an advantage over us, both militarily, economically, and different aspects of things. And drones has been a viable tool that they've been using for years. They use it so that they can gather information both on the video feeds or audio feeds that they have. They've used it, and it's not just China, it's all adversaries, right? So I include North Korea, Iran, and Russia into that same subset. But the technology in China that's being used, we often kind of use it as recreational use, and that's really where the big piece was. The company DJI is a large maker of drones inside the commercial market. So the U.S., relatively inexpensive, has been using it for years. At one point, they had, I think, about 80% of the U.S. market when it came to drones. Since then, I know that some of the data puts it between 50 and 60%, but it's still widely used. And every time an individual, knowingly or unknowingly, is updating their drone, they're communicating with the server in China to get the updates so that their drone can operate better. And that communication link is there. We also know that, beyond surveillance, especially over sensitive areas, that it's also used to build pattern of life. So if you're trying to track down an individual, we see criminals doing it daily that's invading privacy of U.S. citizens, and yet we still haven't taken action to correct that piece. But China still is able to gather information and pull it together through intelligence value and get a better idea of what our security posture is here in the United States. There's also a cybersecurity concern. Because drones not only can carry ordnance and weaponized payloads, but they can also carry viruses or malfeasant software.
Brett Feddersen, appreciate your insights.
Coming up, with the U.S. shifting focus to Asia, Germany is doubling down on building a sovereign Europe. Taiwan's vice president says the island isn't looking to provoke conflict with China. Meanwhile, new research shows Chinese-linked hackers targeting Taiwan's semiconductor industry. And the Pentagon is pushing allies to reveal their moves if China strikes Taiwan. What does this mean for the Indo-Pacific? A retired Marine colonel joins us with insights.
The idea, as I said, of waiting till the shooting starts, well, that's really a guarantee for defeat.
More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The Pentagon under the Trump administration is shifting its strategic focus toward the Indo-Pacific, a move already sparking global reactions. One major player now adjusting: Europe. Germany, Europe's largest economy, is rethinking its strategy in response.
I'm observing that the Americans, for years now, moving away from Europe and turning to Asia. This, so to say, how is it said, pivot to Asia is happening.
German Chancellor Friedrich Merz says the driving force behind Washington's strategic pivot to the Indo-Pacific is clear: China. In his words, the U.S. is, quote, in a very hard competition with China. Acknowledging this reality, Merz says it's time for Europe to take care of itself and start now. To put that commitment into action, Germany just held a historic bilateral treaty with the United Kingdom on Thursday, known as the Kensington Treaty. The deal includes a key pledge: both nations will assist each other in the event of an armed attack. The treaty deepens defense ties between the two countries, building on last October's Trinity House Agreement, Germany and Britain's first comprehensive defense cooperation accord. Peace through strength is a core part of Chancellor Merz's reform agenda. At his first summer press conference as Chancellor, Merz made his message clear, saying, quote, if you want peace, prepare for war. That message is now being echoed by Germany's foreign minister, currently visiting Paris to deepen ties with France.
The USA remains our most important ally outside Europe in a geopolitically turbulent world. But there is no question that we, as Europeans, must take the reins of action back into our own hands. We must ensure the security of our continent ourselves.
The statement comes as the European Union approved its 18th sanctions package against Russia on Friday over its war in Ukraine.
We are coordinating our efforts. One issue is the war in Ukraine.
Alongside the EU's toughest sanctions yet, major European powers are stepping up their defense commitments. They plan to increase spending to 5% of GDP, with 3.5% focused on hard defense, like weapons, equipment, and troops. Germany has pledged to increase its defense spending to 3.5% by 2029, its most ambitious rearmament effort since the post-Cold War era. Taiwan's vice president says the island isn't looking to provoke a confrontation with China. Here she is speaking to the Taiwan Foreign Correspondents Club earlier on Friday.
Taiwanese people are peace-loving and among the friendliest and most generous in the world. We do not seek conflict. We have urged the PRC to dialogue with the democratically elected government of Taiwan with parity and respect.
The Chinese regime considers Taiwan as part of its territory despite never having ruled the island. It calls the democratic nation's president, Lai Ching-te, a separatist. Taiwan's government disputes China's claim to the island. Lai has repeatedly offered talks with China, but Beijing has dismissed his efforts. China has staged at least 6 rounds of major war games around Taiwan since 2022.
New research shows Chinese-linked hackers have their eyes set on the semiconductor industry, and they're escalating and intensifying their cyber espionage activities. Let's zoom in.
China-linked hackers are stepping up their attacks on both the Taiwanese semiconductor industry and investment analysts. This is based on new analysis from cybersecurity firm Proofpoint. Proofpoint says at least 3 different Chinese-linked groups carried out the attacks primarily between March and June of this year. The hackers would pose as job seekers or investors and send out emails that included links to malware. While researchers did not name the targets, they said there were about 15 to 20, ranging from small businesses to large global enterprises. This comes as Washington has beefed up restrictions on exports to China of U.S.-designed chips, which are often manufactured in Taiwan.
The tensions between China and Taiwan are rising. To discuss recent U.S. moves and the stances of its allies, NTD's Don Mao is joined by retired Colonel Grant Newsham. Newsham served as a U.S. Marine officer and has decades of Indo-Pacific experience. He's also a senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy and author of When China Attacks.
Financial Times is reporting that the Pentagon is urging Japan and Australia to clarify what role they would play if the U.S. and China went to war over Taiwan. So I'm just wondering, why is the U.S. asking now? It makes me think, is the likelihood of an attack increasing? What is your analysis?
Well, actually, it's a good question to ask, and it's fairly commonsensical, because one can see trouble coming over Taiwan, and the Americans are expected to do most of the hard work. So it's fair that they would ask their 2 principal allies, or 2 of the 3, in Asia, what are you guys going to do? We don't have the ability to sort of operate on our own and take care of things. We need to know what the Japanese, what the Australians are actually going to do. And you can't just say, well, if something happens, we will follow constitutional processes, as the Japanese have said. The Australians similarly have said, well, we'll think about it. Well, you can't wait until the shooting starts. You have to know beforehand who is with you, what they can bring with them. So this was a fair question to ask. It's best done in private, however. When you do it publicly, or if it gets leaked, which is what happened in this case, that's not the way to go about it. But you need to know, and you need to ask in private.
So building on your point that it's better to know ahead of time, are there any indicators of if or when an attack could happen on Taiwan?
Well, actually, it could probably happen any time. If you listen to the comments of the commander of U.S. Indo-PACOM, Admiral Paparo, he's talking like a guy who's seen some intelligence that has him very worried. Will it come tomorrow? Maybe not. But will it come within the next couple of years? Maybe. And the Chinese have the capability to launch a fairly short notice attack on Taiwan if they want to. So it's best to be prepared and to start asking these questions now.
So you're saying it could happen at any time, but I'm wondering, does the situation in Chinese economy, does that allow for an attack on Taiwan?
Probably does. Unfortunately, the Chinese military has always gotten the priority, no matter how good or how bad the Chinese economy is. And if you look at the apparent capabilities of the People's Liberation Army, all components of it, these are impressive. And they have been practicing and planning for one thing, really, one main thing for decades, and that is to go after Taiwan. So despite having some economic problems, I'm afraid you should not underestimate their military capabilities. Do they have shortcomings? Yes. Could we capitalize on those? Yes. Do we need allies to help us? Yes. But it is a very delicate situation and dangerous one too.
How are you looking at Australia's defense industry minister saying that Australia will not commit troops to a conflict in advance ahead of time? Will they come through in the end, even though if they don't commit now, do you think?
I don't know. We used to think the Australians for sure would be in on the game, but the current government seems to be as interested in doing business with China as it is in having a proper defense and even getting too close to the Americans militarily. Additionally, you have big business in Australia that is pro-China, doesn't want to fight. You have really a leftist faction in the political class that is almost anti-military and almost anti-American. So we may expect a little too much from the Australians. If you deal with the Australian military, and that isn't quite as strong a military as you'd think, but the military is game, and they would like to participate, do what's necessary. But if you look at the rest of Australia's ruling class, its business class, well, I wouldn't be too sure. So that's not a sure thing.
Okay, besides Australia, what do you think about the Japanese? Are they going to help the U.S. if this conflict happens?
Maybe. They need to show us now exactly what they plan to do. I'm not sure Japan has done the necessary planning nor the preparation to actually be able to fight a war, either operationally or even get the population ready psychologically. The idea seems to be, well, we'll just wait and see what happens. And if something does happen, then we will decide. And that's troubling. So that needs to be ironed out now. But Japan is giving some good support to the Philippines, and that is done with an eye towards Taiwan. But when it comes to Taiwan itself, the Japanese have been very standoffish about that. The Japanese military has some good niche capabilities that would be essential in a fight over Taiwan, and the Americans need to have these. But you need to talk in advance about what it is that you're actually going to do. The idea, as I said, of waiting till the shooting starts, well, that's really a guarantee for defeat.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For On the Clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you soon.